Hi everyone, my name is Johanna White, and today I will be talking about communicating science to a lay audience rather than to academics and other experts. And more particularly, I will be focusing on communicating science to kids in a virtual setting. Our goal is to translate a complex idea into something that will inspire curiosity and give a high-level understanding of science. So just a little bit about me. I graduated in May 2020 with my master's in chemistry from the University of Georgia. And when I'm not working on school things, I like to volunteer with community organizations, such as the Society of Women Engineers, um, where these photos came from. And it's from these volunteer experiences that I learned how to communicate science with kids. So I hope that you will enjoy this presentation and learn from my experience and find it helpful as well. It might sound daunting to take a subject you know very well and break it down for a lay audience. Science communication is an art and requires some practice. A good communicator should keep the audience engaged and invite their engagement. Inviting their engagement means letting the audience know that it's okay to be curious, to ask questions, and that it's time to put on our thinking caps. Also, make your audience curious. Make them understand why you think your research is fascinating. Show them your passion. Point out why it's so cool. And the last thing to do as communicators is to make STEM appealing to everyone, to cultivate STEM diversity. This means highlighting scientists from underrepresented backgrounds. So then this photo, you can see Jessica Mayer and Christina Cook, who went on the first all-female led spacewalk. Scientists are already great communicators. We already incorporate 3 requirements when we present our research. We keep the audience engaged by writing a well-written abstract to entice them to read further. We already know that we have a curious audience because we are getting many questions from them. And scientists already know that diversity is important in STEM fields. Research often requires collaborative efforts from other researchers with different expertise. By looking at a problem through different perspectives, it makes a research study more comprehensive. Now that we know what our goals are for communicating, we need to think about how we will introduce ourselves to our audience. It's important to make your story relatable. Being relatable means showing imperfection. Even if you have a life plan, like the image above, it often turns out to be more tangled and complicated, like the bottom image. The audience is interested in learning more about you and how you pursued science. I've learned that it's tempting to tell your story in a linear fashion, like what's on your resume, but people will learn so much more about you and gain a better understanding of your career journey by talking about what makes your journey unique. This could mean talking about difficult choices you've had to make to pursue your dream, or sharing with them some of the ups and downs that led you to where you are today. But by showing that a career journey is not a linear process, you are showing the audience that you don't have to be perfect or have a perfect plan to be where you are today. So here's my story as an example. I am currently a policy intern with Science for Georgia because I want to start a career in science policy. I never thought of the idea of being a policy analyst until last year. I always imagined myself in a lab. But then again, this isn't the first time I've surprised myself with my career choices. I remember before high school, I never thought that I would like science. All that changed in 10th grade when I had a really exciting and encouraging chemistry teacher that made me want to learn more about science. And that's why I have my degrees in chemistry now. So maybe switching gears shouldn't be so surprising to me. So in my example, here's what the audience has learned about me. They've learned that I follow my passions, I'm not afraid to make life choices that don't follow my life plan. And I'm developing a career in science policy because it fuels my passion. How would you tell your story? Feel free to pause the video and practice here. And here are a few questions to help you reflect on your story as well. You can even practice this exercise with someone and ask them for feedback. Now that the audience know who you are, it's time to show them what you know. A common strategy used by many communicators is making analogies. So here's an example of how I would explain organic chemistry to people, which is often viewed as a very complex subject. Organic chemistry can be described like putting Legos together. The starting materials come in different shapes and sizes. You put them together to make something else. When you put things together, it now has a different function and looks very different from the initial starting materials. And sometimes, like in our Lego examples, there are many possible ducts or chemical compounds that we can make out of the same starting materials. This is what organic chemistry is all about, playing with initial chemicals to discover some awesome products. So as you can see, this is what organic chemistry looks like to me in my head, but I've distilled it down to an analogy with Legos. Now it's your turn. Feel free to pause here. Virtual communication is much more difficult because you can't see how the audience is responding. This makes your role as a communicator even more significant to get the audience's attention. Here are some tips that I've used in the past that I hope you will also find useful. So I often try to exaggerate my hand gestures. I hold up items to the screen, and my favorite is doing a live experiment for the kids. I also like to encourage people to use the chat feature for comments and questions, and even just to put an emoji. This kind of helps me gauge like if the audience is engaged or not, and it also helps the audience feel like they are in a community and are experiencing a shared experience. You can also create your own virtual background, maybe some fun pics of you in the lab. Some people also like to use interactive tools that require the audience to send in a response. This is a fun way for audience to see how their peers are responding. Here's a great resource for some unique interactive tools that were designed for virtual learning. There's a lot of room for creativity when it comes to virtual communication, so feel free to try your own ideas. I'll be putting some links to some resources at the end of this presentation. And the last thing we need to do as science communicators is to promote diversity in STEM. STEM fields still show racial and gender gaps. For example, the US Bureau of Labor Statistics show that minorities only make up 30% of the competing field. Another study by the National Science Board shows that only 30% of women graduates are employed in STEM fields. As scientists, we are responsible for undoing these inequities. Recognizing accomplished minorities is one way to inspire inclusion. What's inhibiting diversity is our own biases. Being aware of our own privileges will also help us identify these inequities. Feel free to take this implicit bias test to learn more about your own biases. And here are some resources for using interactive tools that I talked about earlier and the implicit bias test. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Please feel free to contact me via Twitter or my email.